All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We are Calgary Barbell, and we are here to take a look at your videos. You send your lifting videos to moi, to the Calgary Barbell team. We put them up on the screen behind me, and we look at them. We tell you what's what. We try to help y'all lift a little better. So, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We are like 500 subs away from 100K, and we would love it if you helped us get there. That would be really cool. So yeah, consider hitting that subscribe button. We would very much appreciate it. Now, without any further ado, we're gonna get right into this. So we got Dhruv here. He says he's a beginner at deadlifting. He says it looks okay to him. He just kind of wants some confirmation that he's doing things right before he starts piling weight on there. He doesn't have any pain or anything. He's just looking for a second opinion, which I totally get, and I respect that, man. I like the sort of cautious, maybe more mindful approach to lifting. And that's certainly not everyone. That's not how I lifted when I started. I don't know why that minimized itself. Hold up. All right. So like I said, that's certainly not how I started when I started lifting. I was a bit more of a meathead, probably hurt myself a few times from going way too hard, way too often. So honestly, Dhruv, I think what you're doing here is impeccable. I think you're doing a fantastic job. The one thing I would nitpick if you want to get into powerlifting is just hold your lockout for a quick sec at the top. Really great. So let's go through things a little bit here. Wonderful position off the floor. Right? Like this is just a fantastic looking position. You got your shoulder blade lined up directly above the bar. You got your hips at a good height. You got your knees like slightly in front of the bar, which is fine. Slightly in front of the bar, which tells me we've got a lot of our mass packed back this way. The feet look relatively balanced, which is telling me we're probably getting a good amount of work out of the hamstrings and hips, which is something I think a lot of people struggle with when they begin the deadlift, is they try to squat it up. So they set their hips really low and try to like do it like the first pull of a clean or something. So this looks great. Good patience off the floor. Just when you get here, number one, make sure you lock your knees. And number two, just hold it for like 1 second. Just count to 1 and then let it down. And that is great practice. It's going to help train your grip. It's going to get you ready for listening to commands should you choose to compete in powerlifting someday. So yeah, I mean, other than that, dude, please just keep this up. This looks great. And being this good at deadlifting right away, even just technically, tells me that like, hey, you've got some potential, right? You could go places. You could have a big pull someday. So I really do hope you stick with it. I hope you feel encouraged by being featured on the channel. And I hope you went through all of those comments in the last video. If you haven't, go to last week's form check and check out all the comments. I think a lot of people chimed in, gave you a lot of positive encouragement. And that makes me really happy to see that kind of stuff. I'm glad we can provide that for people. You know, even sometimes just like confirming that people are doing things right is a good impact. All right, so this is Zach. He's been lifting since he was 16. Right now he's lifting just to gain strength. He doesn't have any specific goals like in powerlifting. This is 160 kilos for a triple. He says he feels like his back tends to cave when he gets to higher weights. He has avoided using a belt because he thought that squatting without a belt helps improve core strength. And we'll kind of tackle that one at the end because I have a little bit to say about that. But let's take a look at the actual squat itself. Now, number one, it looks like your shoulders are really shrugged up, right? So we go over this all the time on Form Check Friday, but we have, 4 basic movements that we're kind of concerned with for the sake of this discussion in terms of the shoulder blades. So these are your shoulder blades. They're resting on your rib cage. And we have elevation, which is the shrugging up of the shoulder blades. We have protraction, which is the moving forwards. We have retraction, which is retracting them towards one another. And then we have depression, which is the anti-shrug, moving the shoulder blades down on the rib cage. All right, now you know those 4 basic terms. What I'm seeing here is elevation in the shoulder blades, right? You look shrugged up. And a lot of the times it's because we're gripping in too tightly. And our grip is a little too close to the body, which causes us to have to shrug up to get into good position. If you widen your grip a little bit, you might find it easier to depress your shoulder blades. That's going to help you get a lot more upper back tightness right under where that bar sits. And if you can tighten the musculature under where the bar sits, the bar is going to be more stable on your back. You're going to be able to anchor the bar into your brace better, and you're going to be able to translate force through your body into the bar better. So that's the number one thing I see. I think we could work on that. The number 2 thing I see is that we're trying really, really hard to stay super upright. As you descend, you're very much just kind of like pushing your knees forward. So you go into this like exaggerated extension, which I don't know that we even really need to eliminate. Like I think at the top, you're really tucking your butt in and going into like a posterior pelvic tilt. And then right before you squat, you go into like a bunch of anterior pelvic tilt. And I think if you just like stood it up like you were normally standing up in your normal pattern of standing up anytime, off the toilet, off the couch, whatever, stand it up, brace. Don't worry about trying to tuck your pelvis or move your pelvis or anything. I think we're just overthinking. I think we're doing some extraneous movements that maybe don't need to be there. Just try to make it a little more natural in that sense, right? Like you really push your hips in underneath you there, and then you like bounce forwards and backwards with the hips before you squat. So instead of doing that, realize that we want this trunk to operate as a column, as a pillar. We don't necessarily want to see too much of this kind of stuff in the back while we squat. And we will get a little bit of movement, and that's okay. Your back's not going to explode. You're going to be fine. But generally speaking, what we want to see is the back go like this, and then straight down and up, straight down and up, straight down and up. Those are our reps. What we don't want to see is this movement in the back position throughout the squat. And we're seeing a fair bit of that, right? Because you're trying really hard to like reach your chest up and stay super tall. And then you're pushing your knees forward, which is causing your heels to come up off the ground a little bit. And it's causing you to have to swing backwards out of the hole to catch some tension in your hips and hamstrings. So when we start the squat, keep your brace, keep your tightness, keep your trunk moving as a unit, but tilt back, right? Tilt back, sit back on your heels a little bit, and then descend straight down. Don't worry so much about trying to be super, super upright and super tall the whole time you're squatting, right? The reason that you're shifting back like this is because this is a strong position. When you're like this, number one, you're on your toes, and number two, you're not getting a whole lot out of your glutes and hamstrings, your hips and hamstrings, right? So the body shifts back this way, number one, to get itself over to get the weight a little over the center of gravity, which I think is still out in front of. Camera angles play tricks, but still a little bit out in front of your center of gravity. And the weight, your hips shift back this way to put more weight on your heels and to get your hips and hamstrings doing something in terms of extending at the hips, which needs to happen for you to squat. So hopefully that analysis sheds some light on what might be going on here and gives you some things to try to approach in terms of practicing. Yeah, you can see on that last rep, the upper back caves forward, and it's because we're not quite as locked in as we could be with the shoulder blades there. And now we have David. David is a young guy, he's 15. He says his form is quote unquote really bad. He says keeping leg drive and tightness, it just doesn't seem to happen for him. You know what, dude? For a 15-year-old bench pressing, this is pretty friggin' good, David. This is pretty friggin' good. You know how much I could bench press when I was 15? Goose egg, my dude. So, number one, don't discourage yourself. Number two, your form is not really bad. I've seen much worse in my coaching practice and on Form Check Friday. You're very like middle of the pack as far as like novice intermediate lifters go here. I think there's some things we can do to easily iron this out. And yeah, so this is 60 kilos for 2 at 15, which is also sick, man. Like that's freaking great. 90% of his 1 RM. So I actually like your setup. I like that you're putting a lot of intent into like ironing out the upper back and building a little bit of arch and packing the shoulder blades in. I like that the unrack is subtle, right? You're not throwing your shoulders protracted. You're not like losing all that position on your way out of the rack. You're keeping everything nice and tight. You're popping it out of the rack. You got a hand off. You're in a good position there. All really, really good things, man. So from this point, we might need to play around with your foot position a little bit to get better leg drive. Bring your feet out this way so that your knees are out a little bit wider, and try to just push yourself back up the bench this way the whole time. Like give yourself a test push before you unrack and push with your legs, and you should feel your shoulder blades slide down because all of the body should slide up. And if the shoulder blade's anchored to the bench and the friction causes it to stick, then we should see the shoulder blade slide down. So if you push and the shoulder blade slides down, that's how we need to push. Now, the descent actually looks really good. What happens here is that the elbows flare out a little bit early as we get into the touch. The chest collapses a little bit. So what I would say is on the way down, make sure that leg drive, again, is doing its thing. And really reach that chest up like you're trying to meet the bar on its way down. Think about like the bottom of your rib cage, just under the line of your nipples. pull up, pull your rib cage, your sternum up to meet the bar, right? We really want to think about reaching up, getting as big as possible, to try to get a good touch point and to try to minimize the range of motion, right? It might be this much of a difference. Like, it might be almost imperceptible, but that can absolutely make or break a lift. The other thing is, man, this just looks heavy. I bet if you benched more often around like the 45, 50 kilo mark and did some like sub-maximal doubles and triples, you could really iron this out just by practicing. Because I think you have really good basics. I think you have really good mechanics. Yeah, it doesn't look like your legs really turn on until you're like halfway up in the range of motion. So leg drive should be a consistent thing from start to finish, from unrack to re-rack, all the way through. But yeah, man, I honestly don't really think you need to change that much in terms of what your body, like your upper back, your shoulders, your elbows, all that kind of stuff is doing. Keep your elbows a little bit more tucked as you get to the chest. And other than that, you just need to practice with lighter weights, my dude. If you have these reps where you feel like it's kind of just like falling apart, like taking doubles at 90%, that's aggressive. Like that's going to be like a 9.5 RP for most people. Now, if you are, you know, let's say, so this is 90% of your 1RM. So let's say your 1RM is like between 62 and 67.5 kilos. If you do a bunch of work at like 52 kilos and you do like 4 or 5 doubles there, that's not only going to do a lot for building your strength from an adaptation, stimulus adaptation standpoint, but it's also going to do a lot for the practice, the skills component of things, which I think is honestly like your number one thing you need to focus on right now, is just getting good sub-maximal work in so that you can practice moving well. Because I definitely think by watching this video, you are capable of moving well. You just need to cultivate that further. You need to practice moving well. So that's my advice for you, David. All right. We've got Lawrence's deadlift here. It's trying to get us to download a new codec or something. So we're going to just open this in a different player real quick, and boom, we're there. All right. So Lawrence's deadlift. Now, Lawrence has been powerlifting for about 2 years. He says his first meet was in February. He's struggling with his deadlift, he says. He feels like his shoulders roll forward, his hips shoot up, and it puts a little bit of stress on his low back, so it's not very comfortable. So this is a set of 4 at 86% or 365 pounds. Now, if this is actually 86%, we probably wouldn't have missed that last rep. So this might be, again, a case of kind of overestimating or overinflating those numbers and just doing too much, right? More is not always better. Just because we're able to train with heavier weights doesn't always mean that we should train with heavier weights. The ability to train with heavier weights is an expression of previous adaptation and is not an absolute necessity for further adaptation. I'm going to say that again, if I can get it right. The ability to train with heavier weights is an expression of previous adaptation, not a necessity for future adaptation. So what that means is just because you can lift with heavier weights doesn't mean you always need to. The weights and the training range in terms of percentage of your 1RM, RPs, whatever, that you use to get to a certain level of strength is oftentimes, if we shift that just the slightest little bit more intense, because yes, progressive overload is property number one in terms of what we're trying to get after to drive strength adaptation. But a lot of the times people think like, oh, like I did 350 last week, so I need to do 365 this week. And it's like, man, what if you did 352? Or what if you did 350 for 2 or 3 weeks in a row? I bet you'd still get better. I bet you you'd still get better. You do 350 3 weeks in a row, and on the 4th week you add 5 pounds. I bet you anything, you will still get better. Anyways, that's my rant on increasing training loads before it's necessary. And again, going back to the point I was trying to make with David, practice. This isn't just lift the most you can so that your body adapts and eventually gets stronger by brute force. This is also practice the skill of lifting weights. Because again, with Lawrence here, it looks like you have really good sort of basics, right? Great start position. You're pulling the tension into the bar, you're pulling a slack out of the bar, but unfortunately we just don't keep those knees forward. So maybe we could be pulling the slack out a little bit better. And one of the cues, and I actually got this from one of the other Calgary barbell coaches, Taylor, is he was talking about thinking about pushing the floor away before you bring the hips down. Excuse me. So right at this point, I want you to start applying pressure to the floor. Like you're already almost trying to push the bar off the floor. Obviously to not that same extent, but pushing the floor already, and then bring your hips down into position. And by that point, you should start to have so much tension that with lighter weights, at least, the bar will float off the floor. What it looks like is you sit yourself down into position and then you try to find tension. This movement right here should be how you find tension. And then you don't find tension until your hips kind of, wiggle their way back up, the knees wiggle back a little bit, and then you're pulling from this somewhat compromised position. The other cues I would give you are to keep your knees forward, right? That's going to help you keep the hips down, and keep those lats tight. Keep those shoulder blades down, because as soon as the shoulder blades get pulled forward in front of the bar, all bets are off. Things go wrong. Things go wild out there. So keep those shoulder blades pulled down. Again, depression. We need more depression. Keep those shoulder blades pulled down. Try to find your lats. Again, like one of the biggest cues that I use in my deadlift, bar none, across the last 10 years of lifting and multiple world records, is just finding my lats, finding some tension, some sensation, I'm not going to say it, but activation, finding some feeling in my lats, understanding how my lats work as a part of bracing my position. And from there, like, it's just a leg press. That's the sumo deadlift in a nutshell. For me anyways, right? It's not one size fits all, but yeah, I really do think like most of my clients, I've been able to really hammer the lats in on the deadlift. It seems to make a huge difference. So looks like as you go through the sets, you get a little, or as you go through the reps, you get a little bit better. I honestly think you probably would have gotten that last rep. You just kind of gave up, which is fine, right? Sometimes when you're coming up against like, oh boy, this is going to be a 10.5 RPE, sometimes you're better off just not pulling it. And that's fine. But yeah, man, I honestly think we maybe just need a little bit more practice with some lighter weights. And again, skills practice. That's what it is. Okay, so this is Shochilt. I hope I'm saying your name right. I know I've been known for butchering names, but Shochilt has been lifting since July 2020. With COVID closures and all, that's about 7 months. So here she's squatting 235 for 6 out of 9. She says she struggles with bracing and leaning to the left too much. So I'm guessing what she's talking about is like a little bit of hip shift over to the left side, right? If we were to watch this squat from the front, we'd see her hips kind of shift over to the side a little bit. So she also says she runs into a pretty pronounced sticking point, which we're starting to see crop up in the video here. If we watch this last rep, I bet it's going to be expressed. Right there. Okay, cool. So she said she's trying front squat, pause squat, low bar, and high bar, and trying to figure out, how the heck to advance her squat and get rid of this sort of tendency. So I'm gonna again, like that's a 9.5, 10 RP. Again, it might just be, this might just be a sort of selection bias for people who want to send me like hard sets where things break down, and yes, that's good. But if this is representative of most of your training, we need to dial it back, right? And then the same goes for Lawrence and David. If that's not representative of all of your training, then you probably understand the concepts of like, okay, we need to practice the scale. We need to get submaximal volume in and work in. Sorry about that quick interruption. Bronson knocked some stuff off the desk. Okay, so where was I? I was saying that if these extra hard sets and these very high RPEs are representative of most of your training, and this is what most of your sets look like, across the board, pull it back. That's number one. Because these first few reps, we don't really see that sticking point. We don't really see that same looseness. We probably don't see as much of that shifting. Because generally what happens, and this is my sort of professional experience and anecdote for certain, but when we get loose in the bottom, when we really bottom out and we have those pronounced sticking points, that's generally when we'll see that little bit of hip shift. If we can maintain tightness and we can be smooth out of the bottom, we're going to keep more even foot pressure. We're going to keep a tighter brace. We're often going to see very much less of that shifting. So it could be a matter of like, okay, we just need to train at an intensity where these issues don't manifest, and slowly raise that threshold over time. And probably for the foreseeable future, your limit lifts, your 10 RPEs, your third attempt squats, you're going to get that little bit of hip shift. You're going to get that little bit of looseness, and that's okay. That's not the end of the world. But if we can sort of eliminate the expression of that in most of our training, that's going to be the number one angle to attack this from. Now, I know not everybody just wants to hear like, duh, you just use less weight, 5 head, but it's true. And I'm a big fan of the basics and just doing the basics right really well a lot for a long time. Now, that being said, we are going to give some technical analysis here. So, show chilled. I'm seeing a lot of extension here, and I think that one of the things that happens when we extend a lot, and like I was pointing out with who was our other squatter today, Zach, when we see a lot of extension, a lot of the times it's paired with us really popping forward in the bottom, and I think this is pretty evident in the bottom position of your squat. Everything kind of comes forward as opposed to staying back. So I would say if you can, perhaps tempo squats and pause squats. I know you're already doing pause squats, but be conscious of how you're doing your pause squats, right? I don't want you to go to the bottom and kind of like relax into this bottom position and just wait there. I want you to actively be loaded in the bottom position. I want your muscles to be under contraction, under tension in the bottom position. That is very, very important to the pause squat. We need an isometric contraction. We can't just be resting down there. Deadening the stretch reflex, yeah, maybe there's something to that, but I think the isometric contraction and the additional control and the additional focus on the exact mechanics of the bottom position is what makes the pause squat such a useful tool. So, all that to say that I think we could be a lot tighter in the bottom. I think at the bottom we're popping forward. I think at the bottom we should try to sit back a little bit more and keep a little more even on the feet. Are these, I think that's your feet. Can I see? Yeah, we can see a little bit of lift in the heel into the bottom, which tells me we're getting forward in the bottom. So if we can reach down and back a little bit, if we can try to maintain more trunk and core tightness and resist the bottom a little more instead of kind of like falling into it. I always say this, but create the bottom position, don't fall into it. So yeah, hopefully some of that makes sense, and hopefully I did an okay job of your name. I like that name. All right. Up next, we have Preacha, and Preacha is doing some close grip bench here. So Preacha says he's been powerlifting for 1 year, and he feels like he loses power off the chest. Just at some point, it all falls apart for him. So yeah, he says when he does bench press or close grip bench, somewhere near the chest, he feels like he loses a lot of power. So I want everybody watching right now to head down to the comments section below, and I want you to give some constructive criticism and feedback to Preacha about his bench here. Why do you think he's losing power off the chest? Why do you think this like bottom part of the range of motion seems to be what he's talking about? What happens in here, and why is that seemingly a problem for him? Now this is close grip, right? Obviously the channel meme is I'm going to tell him to move his grip wider, but I'd be very interested to see what other people see in this bench press here, insofar as like, okay, why might we not be so strong off the chest? What can we change? What exercises can we do? What cues can we give the lifter, right? Leave it down in the comments below. Again, we're super close to 100K, so please hit that subscribe button. We love you very much, and we'll see y'all next Friday for Form Check Friday. Bye-bye.